Since 2011, only 5 rookie wide receivers have gone over 2.4 yards per route run. I'm going to listen to you. Okay. First one, Odell Beckham Jr. Ever heard of him? AJ Brown, Justin Jefferson, Jamar Chase. Those are 4 really good wide receivers. Okay. They were all top 6 fantasy wide receivers in their second season in the NFL. Do you want to guess who the 5th one was? When you sit down to prepare for your fantasy football drafts, you look at the rankings and, well, you immediately start to decide, okay, I really love this player. I hate this player. But to help you out, Dave Kluge and I, we are going to give you a few, just a handful of players from our fantasy football rankings that we love or hate. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to compare our rankings from footballguys.com, and we're each going to make a pitch for the player that we love more than the other person. So it's up to the other person to decide. Have they been convinced to change their mind? Do they now love that ranking? Do they move them up a little bit? Do they still hate the outlook for that player?
This is a really good introductory show because it gives us a chance to talk about some guys that we do have
Yep.
differing opinions on. And I think that makes for some great content. I don't know if I necessarily hate any of these players, but I do dislike them a little bit more than you like them. So it's going to make for some really fun
Yeah,
conversation
hate's
today.
a strong word. Hate's more of like the emotionally charged word. I think you never really hate a player. You hate the ADP. You hate where they're getting drafted. We don't hate any of you guys. Like our first player we're going to talk about here, Alvin Kamara, running back for the Saints. We don't hate you. We don't even know you. But I've got Alvin Kamara ranked a little bit higher. I've got him as my running back 29. Dave, you got him at running back 34. So not like a huge gap here. The Football Guys consensus ranks over on footballguys.com has him as the running back 33, and the average draft position right now is running back 31. So let me lay out the pitch here for you, Dave, and I'm going to do this B-Rabbit style. Like, I'm just going to throw out all the bad things first so you can't attack me with that. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
So first things first, obviously we know there's a suspension coming, right? It could be anywhere from 2 to 6 games. It kind of seems like it's going to be 4 games. That's already built into his draft cost here. He's the running back 31 in average draft position. You're looking at a guy in the 9th round who come on, we're not gonna argue the talent. I think you might argue a couple things later. I'm not putting too much stock into last season. They had a new coach, new offense, new quarterback, and he still finished as the running back 18. We also know he's probably due for some positive touchdown regression at the lowest total of his career, just 2, lowest average targets of his career, going from normally 6.5 targets per game to just 5. And essentially, if you go back, I was looking at this, he missed the first 4 games last year kind of anyways. He had 2 injury games and then 2 just, I don't want to, they're not goose eggs, but stinkers of games where he had 7 PPR points. But then from week 5 on, he was the running back 9 in PPR. And Dave, I think that we're starting to overthink this. Now the Saints get Derek Carr. He comes in, he targets the running back far more than Andy Dalton did last year. I do believe the offense should improve. They're not necessarily going to be the best offense, but I think that we're going to see a big step up. And I think that a lot of us ended up making this, I don't want to say mistake, but we got this little misconception last year with DeAndre Hopkins. He had his 6-game suspension last year, but he was still going in the 7th round of fantasy football drafts. And then from week 7 on, when he played, he was the wide receiver 8 in points per game. And you'd think that we would all look at that and say, okay, it doesn't quite matter if there's a suspension. I'm going to get good value out of this player for the rest of the season. And so Kamara's ADP in the 9th round is surprising to me. He's never finished lower than running back 12 until last year, which was his worst fantasy season. And he was still running back 15 in points per game. The Saints had their worst offense in 6 years. I am so far into the idea that we are all overreacting to the Alvin Kamara stuff outside of injury or just a complete deterioration of him as an athlete. He just feels like an easy top 20 running back. And this is what you do. When you see a flaw in the market, you take advantage of it, you buy, and he's just going so late in drafts.
Something for me is I just try to identify trends. And when I see that a player is trending downward, I try to take notice of that. You know, he's going into his age 28 season, which is that really scary age for running backs. If you
Right.
play Dynasty, you know that you never want to hold a running back over the age of 28 unless you are actively contending. And he's starting to show some of those signs of a decline. I mean, sure, he missed some time last year, but it was the first year that he didn't make the Pro Bowl in his entire career. He had the lowest broken tackle rate of his entire career, which is what he made a living on early on in throughout his career. Yards after contact per attempt is one of my favorite efficiency metrics, and he had the second fewest of his career there. His pass grade on PFF was the lowest of his career after setting the career low just the year before. And then when you look at the offseason moves, they brought in Jamal Williams and gave him $6 million. They used an early third round pick on Kendre Miller. So there are going to be better running backs than the corpse of Mark Ingram that we saw there last year. And it's possible that he could just rewind the clock and look like Alvin Kamara of old. But for me, when a running back starts to show signs of decline at this age, I'm not one to typically ignore it. So I think that's why I'm a little bit scared. We're seeing some of the
Right.
signs of dips in efficiency, and I just worry that that is just going to continue to decline going into 2023.
Dave, fun fact, you mentioned his name. I went to elementary school with Mark Ingram. We were on the same basketball team. Yeah, we won. First place. What's up? The green team. Let's go.
I'm sure you carried that team, and Mark
For the
Ingram was
most
just cheering
part.
you on. Yeah, I'm
Yeah,
sure.
no, I was definitely the floor facilitator. It was what was I, 6? Yeah. I was definitely I was the Jason Kidd out there on the court. But
Well, doesn't
you
that
know
contextualize things for us? We're talking about how Mark Ingram, like the corpse of Mark Ingram, and he's the same age
right?
as us.
It's the
Like we feel
same
like we're in our
age, dude.
primes, and like our NFL windows are closed, unfortunately. So that's why we're
No.
just talking now.
Our window for a lot of things is closing really quickly. You bring up something, Dave, that I kind of want to touch on before we keep going here, right? And it does sound like, and I can get on board with this, where maybe Alvin Kamara is not getting as much of the early workload stuff that we're thinking of, right? Like maybe the rushing efficiency isn't there, but do we think that that could even level out with more receiving work with Derek Carr coming in and with him having that specialized role? Because that's not really something that Kendry Miller or Jamal Williams have ever done. And then we saw Josh Jacobs get a major receiving role last year with Derek Carr. Is that something that we could kind of see it all balance out with Kamara?
Yeah, that's a great point, and that would actually be the best case scenario. A guy like Kamara, you don't want him running between the tackles and getting rolled up by 380-pound defensive linemen. You want him out in space, breaking tackles, catching passes. So that really would be the best case scenario. And Kendry Miller's talked a lot this offseason about his abilities as a pass catcher, but we haven't seen it yet. I mean, it's all just him saying he can do it, which a lot of guys say that they can do things that they can't do. So you make a good point there, and that actually would be the best case scenario. If he is just the third down back and just the hurry up guy, and he's getting 6, 7, 8 targets per game, then he could absolutely live up to that ADP.
Yeah, I think there's still definitely some life there left in Alvin Kamara. What I want to do let's take a look at your running back rankings and let's see if I have convinced you to just move him up just a wee bit, man. All right. Cause you got him here at running back 34. At 33, you have Alexander Mattison. At 32, James Cook. At 31, Rashaad Penny. And at 30, this one actually surprised me, Jerick McKinnon. So I have Alvin Kamara ranked ahead, like all those guys except for Madison. But have I convinced you to move Alvin Kamara up to maybe running back 30? Like that seems still very, very generous.
I think I'm going to stick with this one as is, but you do make good points that it's not like we were miles apart on this player. We were only 6 spots off. What I'll say about Jerick McKinnon, though, really quickly, is they have similar roles. I mean, they're both going to be the passing down specialists on their offense. They're both going to get some goal line work here. Jerick McKinnon is just on a much, much better offense. So, I mean, worst case scenario is that this Saints offense doesn't take a big step forward with Alvin or with Derek Carr. Alvin Kamara still maintains his role on a very low volume, slow paced offense. So I think I'm going to keep it as is, but you do make some strong points, and I want the viewers to know we aren't that far off on Alvin Kamara.
You're wrong, but that's okay. We're we're gonna move on because we're gonna have a few more of these that we're gonna disagree on. But hey, listen, if you have been enjoying this discussion so far, please like this video and subscribe to the channel so that you don't miss our next episode. Throughout the preseason, we're gonna be giving you 2 episodes a week, and then once we get into the regular season, we're gonna be giving you 4 episodes a week, Monday through Thursday, and then a 5th episode where we're gonna be doing a Sunday live start sit every week for you guys. And don't forget, drop your questions in the comments below. If you have any questions about the players we're talking about, or maybe someone that you're looking at drafting for your fantasy team, let us know in the comments below. Now, Dave, you have a running back here that I'm going to let you introduce that we're a little bit far apart on here.
Yeah, so Damien Harris has been my guy for years, and we're starting off spicy here because this is one of my biggest flag plants in my rankings. I have Damien Harris sitting at
Woo!
RB23, which I know is high
Woo!
compared to your ranking of RB35, which is a little bit more level headed and a little bit more measured. But I see Damien Harris as a perfect fit for this Bills offense. And we saw it for the last 4 years. They forced Devin Singletary into a role that he just wasn't made for. I mean, they were asking him to be in between the tackles bruiser and a goal line back and these things that he can't really do. And now in steps Damien Harris, who is 3 inches heavier, or I'm sorry, 3 inches
Wow.
taller and 15 pounds heavier. And he's got more power. He's got more breakaway speed. He's got more high end burst. I mean, he kind of does everything that Singletary can do, but just a little bit better and a little bit stronger and a little bit faster. Now, Singletary saw 150 carries in back to back seasons now with the Buffalo Bills. And that's a mark that Damien Harris only saw once throughout his career in New England. And over those 2 seasons, Devin Singletary was an RB2 or better, top 24 running back in fantasy scoring. So if we assume that Damien Harris is going to take over Devin Singletary's role in the Bills offense and Damien Harris is a better player, doesn't it make sense that he would be at least an RB2 or better? Now, I'll rewind 2 years and talk about Damien Harris when he led the league in touchdowns. And while everybody remembers that, what a lot of people don't realize is that he was graded as PFF's best running back in 2021. He can do it all. So now we're looking at him being a very talented back with a similar role on a better offense. The lack of downside here is pretty obvious. I mean, Josh Allen historically hasn't checked down to running backs a ton, and he siphons away a lot of the goal line touches. But got to think that with them drafting James Cook last year and signing Damien Harris this year, they're hoping that they can get Josh Allen to stay in the pocket a little bit more. So right now, I think all that is baked into his ADP. His ADP is 38. If we think that he's going to take on this Devin Singletary role, he's getting drafted below his floor right now.
Yeah, I agree with you kind of. I do. After hearing you and Lee when I was looking at the show notes here, I started to think, okay, I do have to get a little higher on Damian Harris. I actually just drafted him in Scott Fishbowl. He's my running back 4. Drafted him after Alvin Kamara though, and man, like I think about this, right, and I don't dislike Harris at all. I actually do think he's going to be the RB1 in Buffalo. I do think maybe James Cook, everything that you feel about Damian Harris has to kind of coincide with how you feel about James Cook. And if you love James Cook, it's kind of hard to love Damian Harris and vice versa, right? And what I think kind of showed us last year with James Cook is that they had 13 games, the Bills did, after Zach Moss got traded. And Cook outtouched Devin Singletary only in 3 games out of those 13. So you're looking at, just like you said, Damian Harris being the more primary back. And it's something that's kind of already being reported too here, where Josh Allen knows he's got to do less of the short yardage, QB sneaks, right? Like he's got to play more quarterback and less athlete, like how they classify guys ATH, right? Coming out of high school to college. He's got to stop doing that. And he's got to be more of the quarterback. And so I can absolutely see a world where Damian Harris gets some double digit touchdowns in that offense. But you know what? And I hate to do this on our very first episode. There is the corpse of Latavius Murray still there. And we always, every year, we're like, no, he's probably not going to make that. And then he shows up and he's everyone's favorite waiver wire pickup by week 3. And he gives us like 6 good weeks. Is that something at all that you are worried about, that Latavius Murray could actually show up and ruin things for both of these guys?
I don't have it off the top of my head right now, but what is Latavius Murray? 32, 33 years old. And I mean, he does kind of play a similar game to Damien Harris, but he doesn't have that breakaway speed that Damien Harris has. So I think that if you're looking at the two, it wouldn't surprise me if Damien Harris actually makes the roster and Latavius Murray is cut before camp. We'll see. But back to James Cook. I mean, James Cook, I can't help but feel like he's a little bit of a trap. We see these guys all the time that put up these really exciting efficiency metrics on a very limited sample size, and they get that limited sample size because they are too small to carry a huge role. It kind of reminds me of Chase Edmonds and the way that everyone was gassing up Chase Edmonds last year after he went to Miami because he had the breakaway runs and he had the exciting rushing yards over expectation per attempt. But I don't know if we're going to see James Cook really able to crack a workload that's more than like 6 to 8 touches per week. Damien Harris profiles to be a 3-down back, so I think that he gets the chunk of the carries. The issue, like we talked about, though, is that there might not be a lot of high-value touches to go around. So I'm actually slightly above consensus on James Cook as well, but I'm way above consensus on Damien Harris. And really what it comes down to is I think that with the Bills investing almost $500 million into Josh Allen, their priority this offseason is getting him to stay in the pocket so he's not taking those big hits when he's running with the ball, which would be good news for the running backs in Buffalo.
All right, so let's take a look at my running back rankings here. I've got Damien Harris at the running back 35. So ahead of that, I've got Brian Robinson at 34, Samaje Perine at 33, Antonio Gibson at 32, and Khalil Herbert, our guy, at 31. I think I can be convinced here because of the offense, because of the likelihood that he will have the majority of the carries. I just kind of going through your process of elimination, right? Like Brian Robinson might get the majority of carries in Washington, but it's Washington. It's not Buffalo. Samaje Perine, yeah, he might get the majority of the carries, but we don't know how good Denver is going to be. We don't know how much when Javonte Williams really comes back. Antonio Gibson, I feel like we've been waiting for that for years since he had that breakout at a young age. I'm comfortable with moving Damien Harris up to running back 32. I will not, and I cannot move him ahead of Khalil Herbert, but I will move him up to 32. So well done, David. So I actually want to tell everyone right now, we have got a major giveaway already here on the first episode. Okay. So if you are still watching through, you're listening through, guess what? You have earned this. We got a big giveaway and we are giving you a chance to go head to head against us in the all new Footballguys Fantasy Show Listener League. Now to enter, all you have to do, it's really simple. Go and leave a review for this podcast, okay, on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, and then send a screenshot to my co-host here, Kluge at footballguys.com. That's spelled Kluge, Kluge at footballguys.com. All you have to do, remember, leave a review for the podcast, send a screenshot to us over at Kluge at footballguys.com, and you'll be entered for a chance to go toe-to-toe against us in the all-new Listener League. All right, so let's take a look at the next player we've got here, and it is Alexander Mattison, running back for the Minnesota Vikings. And Dave, this one really surprised me. We kind of talked about him a little bit earlier, so where you have him. I've got him at running back 23. You got him at running back 33. Football Guys consensus has him at running back 23, and the average draft position for Alexander Mattison is at running back 22. So listen, I'm having a really hard time with the Alexander Mattison stuff because we all loved him when he was a backup. We loved him when he got his opportunities, and now we hate him. Like he's getting more opportunity. We're like, no. You're better when you do this only once or twice a season, not the whole season. That's ridiculous. We can't be into this. And I look at it. Minnesota, they give him a contract, 2-year contract. They let go of Dalvin Cook. There appears to be some form of confidence, right? Like I know that they went out and they drafted Dwayne McBride. He was like a 6th or 7th round running back. Ty Chandler, who was a 5th round running back the year before, who I like Ty Chandler, but it seems like there's a lot of confidence here for Alexander Mattison. And I mean, you and I both know running back is all about volume. And something that I think every running back or anyone who's played will tell you, running backs need that volume. It helps them get into a rhythm. It's similar to shooters in basketball. You know, the more they shoot, the better they get for these running backs. And they get into that rhythm, all of a sudden they're playing a little bit better. So I do think that the volume is going to matter a lot here for Alexander Mattison. You look at what the Vikings were doing last year with Dalvin Cook, who's averaging 18 touches per game. I don't think it's out of the realm of possibility for Alexander Mattison to be averaging 15 to 16 touches per game. He's not quite as talented as Dalvin, but I think that with 16 touches per game, he could do some real damage in the fantasy football department. I mean, this is actually really interesting, Dave. When we talk about touches, and I put the threshold specifically at 16 touches. Last year, every single running back to average 16 touches per game finished as a top 24 running back in points per game. Every single one of them. Even Zeke, whether they were good, bad, old, or bad at playing center, they all finished as a top 24 running back. Now, I get it. That doesn't mean, and that was in points per game, not like because they stayed healthy. That was in points per game. So I know that everyone's used the stat here with Alexander Mattison, that he's got these 8 games with 15 or more opportunities, averaged nearly 17 PPR points. In half PPR, it's even better, right? So if you play half PPR, I think Alexander Mattison moves up even further. The stat that stood out to me was actually his 14.5% target share, which would be 7th amongst running backs during that time. So when he filled in for Dalvin, he was getting the passing work. And I think that we've kind of let ourselves believe he's not going to get much passing work at all. He's not as dynamic as Dalvin, which all these things can still be true, and he can still get enough volume to be good for fantasy football. Dave, you really dislike Alexander Mattison.
I didn't realize that I disliked him this much until I started looking at consensus rankings and your rankings. And for me, the big thing, well, there's a few things that go into this. One, Dalvin Cook was healthy last year. He played a full 17-game season. So when we look at all of these opportunities where Alexander Mattison went nuts when Dalvin Cook was injured, this was the Mike Zimmer era. We don't know if he's going to get that same treatment now with Dalvin Cook out of the picture. We also don't know if we can do it over a full season. Projecting 20 touches in a week, a single week spot start is relatively easy. 340 touches for an entire season is a little bit harder to project. Now, it's tough to pull historical comps for Alexander Mattison. So bear with me because this is a very imperfect science and an imperfect sample. But what I did is I pulled guys who, through their first 4 years, had started fewer than 8 games and racked up 1,100 or more yards. And it left us with a pretty short list of players. And not many of these fared well after year 4. Jarius Norwood, Buck Allen, Justin Forsett, Mike Bell, Toby Gerhart, and James Starks. So we've fallen for this trap before. I know it myself. I drafted Toby Gerhart his first year in Jacksonville in the 3rd round of my fantasy football draft. And I think that we've gotten a little bit smarter now as fantasy football analysts. And that's why he's now getting pushed way outside of the 3rd round. Now that running back dead zone is getting pushed out into the 7th or 8th round. So the acquisition cost isn't as steep, and it's not going to hurt you if he doesn't hit the way that Toby Gerhart in round 3 would have in 2017. But I still do have some concerns there. You talked about Ty Chandler and Dwayne McBride, and you didn't even mention Kenny Nwangu, one of my favorite running backs, who is
Stop.
just a spark plug. And he has been relegated to special teams, but I think there's going to be a little bit more of a rotation than Alexander Mattison stepping into the 5th highest opportunity share in the league like Dalvin Cook saw last year.
All right. We're going to see if my pitch has done the trick here for Alexander Mattison. Feel like I gave some pretty good
You
data
did.
here. All
You
right, so
did.
let's take a look at your running back rankings. You have Alexander Mattison as your running back 33. At 32, you've got James Cook, 31, Rashaad Penny, 30, Jerick McKinnon, and 29, Khalil Herbert. So have I convinced you to move Alexander Mattison up?
I think I might be able to. And one of the guys that I hate to say, because I know he's one of our guys, the more and deeper that we are getting into camp, well, not even camp, just the off season, there's starting to be a lot of murmurs that Khalil Herbert might not be the guy in Chicago, that it could be kind of a frustrating split. So you can convince me to put him ahead of Khalil Herbert. And then, once training camp opens, that's when we're going to start getting clearer visions of some of these backfields. So right now I'm expecting Jerick McKinnon to still be somewhat involved, but if Isaiah Pacheco shows up in camp, I could see me putting Alexander Mattison ahead of him as well. So I'm not married to where I've got him right now as a back end RB3. I'm going to start listening to the drum beat in camp when that opens up in a couple weeks. And if they say Mattison is looking great, he's ready for this huge role, whatever, then I can move him up. But where it's at right now, I'm expecting a little bit more of a committee.
All right, Dave, take us to your next player. It's a running back who, man, he is divisive to say the least.
Yeah, and I talked about pulling these historical comps for Alexander Mattison, the Buck Allens and the Justin Forsetts and the Toby Gerhart. Well, there were also 3 active players: Alexander Mattison, who we just talked about, Tony Pollard, who seized his opportunity last year in year 4 rather than having to wait until year 5, and the other guy is the guy I'm talking about right now, Rashaad Penny. So very similar historical production where he hasn't started many games, but he has been really good in the games that he started. And we've seen it. He has been hyper efficient when given the opportunities. I mean, I'm not saying this lightly. Rashaad Penny might be one of the best running backs in the league. Like, you could put him up there with Derrick Henry and Nick Chubb. The problem is we never see it for more than 1 or 2 games at a time before he gets injured. And when you look at historical yard per carry leaders with a minimum 300 carries, this cracks me up. I pulled this up the other day. Top 3 in NFL history are Marion Motley, Rashaad Penny, and Bo Jackson. Alfredo, let me ask you real quick,
I,
and don't be
I have
embarrassed.
heard you.
Do
I
you
have
know
heard you
Marion
say,
Motley?
yeah, I have heard you say Marion Motley to anyone and everyone that will listen to you. Stop saying Marion Motley. Isn't
I'm
this
just
like
saying,
a?
he's the
Isn't
only
he
guy,
like
only guy in
a
NFL
war
history
veteran?
with. Yes, he was a war veteran. He fought overseas in World War II, came home and suited up for the Cleveland Browns on both sides of the ball. He was a linebacker and a fullback, 5.7 yards per carry over his career. The only player, like, you have to go to a World War II war veteran to find somebody who was more efficient with a ball in his hand than Rashaad Penny.
So he
And
was out
really,
there just crushing commies and then running for like 7 yards a carry.
that's exactly what he was
That was
doing.
just his weekend job. Like he
5.7.
came back in from. Oh my gosh, this
Yeah,
is
they
great.
had just a great program out there in Germany to get him really fit and ready for the NFL. But really what it comes down to with Rashaad Penny now is that he is on a great offense, and not just a good, powerful offense, but an offense that loves to run the ball. I mean, Atlanta and Chicago, what they did last year, just historic run rates. It's tough to even compare to that. But the Eagles were third in rushing attempts behind the Bears and Falcons last year. And then Rashaad Penny, we know about it at this point. You know, he's a former first round pick, off the charts athleticism. Injuries are the only thing that are going to hold him back from being an elite running back. So right now, drafting him as RB31, sure, he could finish as RB85 when he gets hurt in week 2. Or what if this is the year he stays healthy and he's going to have a good opportunity on a good offense and he has RB1 upside and you're drafting him as your RB3?
Listen, I don't ever want to project injury, but right now you are the meme from Arrested Development where it's like, did it work for those people? No, but it might work for us. Like
Yeah.
you have him ranked ahead of Alexander Mattison. Like, you're a crazy person, David. Okay,
So
I
if
think you're actually one of only 2 analysts in the entire fantasy industry that has Rashaad Penny ranked ahead of Alexander Mattison. I applaud
So
you for
here
your
is
bravery.
my argument for it. I don't know if Alexander Mattison is going to possess that like league winning upside. I think best case scenario for Alexander Mattison, he's kind of a mid to back end RB2. If things fall into place for Rashaad Penny, he could be not only like a top 5 running back, he could be the number 1 running back if everything falls into place. So for me, when you get that deep into the weeds and you're in round 8, round 9, round 10, you're not trying to chase projected volume. You're looking for that home run swing, that guy that can really win a league for you. And at that point in the draft, I think Rashaad Penny has higher value than, or higher upside than almost anybody available there.
Well, I mean, I'll argue you're not going to chase volume in round 10 because Alexander Madison's going to be going well ahead of that because he has the guaranteed volume. Rashaad Penny, there is, and this is going to sound horrible when I say it, but there's a better chance that he gets cut in camp because not being cleared medically than him lasting the full 16 or 17, what is it? It's 17 games now, 17 game season. And I hate to say that, but he's a guy that surpassed 12 touches just 11 times in his career. His career has been 5 seasons. I'm with you. I'm with you that he's incredibly talented. He's really good. He's right up there with the greats like Marion Motley. But like, I don't know, man. Like, I can't bring myself to do it. I guess like if I'm looking at the draft board, he's there in the 10th round. Maybe I can do it. I just don't know that I'll ever draft him and be like, okay, yeah, I'm pretty comfortable putting him in my starting lineup this week. He should crush it. Because I don't know. Like they're going to have DeAndre Swift. They're going to have Kenny Gainwell. Jalen Hurts is still stealing rushing yardage and touchdowns. And it's just like, even if he's healthy, I don't know how good it'll actually be for him.
It's
Let's take a
fair.
look at.
Scared money don't make money. And that at that point in the draft, I'm going for a guy that's got overall RB1 upside. And the thing with Rashaad Penny, a lot of the other guys that are getting drafted in that area of the draft need somebody else to get injured for them to step into the
Yep.
opportunity. Rashaad Penny doesn't need that. If he's healthy, he could be the guy from week 1. He's more talented than DeAndre Swift, Kenny Gainwell, Boston Scott, any of these other guys you want to talk about in Philadelphia.
Speaking of scared money, Dave, I sold all my Bitcoin yesterday, so I'm feeling pretty good about it. Feeling pretty good. All right.
Congratulations.
It was a big week for us. All right, let's take a look at my running back rankings. I have Rashaad Penny at running back 42. At 41, I've got Devin Singletary, 40 Zach Charbonnet, 39 Jamal Williams, 38 Elijah Mitchell. If anything, I feel like I can be convinced to move some of those other guys down and maybe still not move Rashaad Penny up. Like I'm seeing this and I'm like, I'm not that into Jamal Williams.
Yeah, that was the
Um,
one that jumped out to me.
yeah, I don't think he should be in the top 40. But Rashaad Penny, like, maybe. I guess so. Let's do just for the sake of you, and you did such a great job pulling Marion Motley out of the archives.
I don't
I
even know
will
if I'm
move
saying the name right, to be honest. I just read his Wikipedia page. That's about the extent of my knowledge on Marion Motley.
I will do this. I am willing to move Jamal Williams down to 42 and just bump everyone up one spot. So Rashaad Penny, you got a +1. Thanks to Dave Kluge.
I
Great
will
job.
take that victory lap.
That's a big W for you. All right, so we've been talking about our rankings, and I'm sure you're thinking, Alfredo, Dave, this is cool. Great show. It's hard to track all this. Like, where can I find all these rankings that are nice and neat? All for my viewing pleasure. Just head on over to footballguys.com where you can see customizable rankings that we have. It's really, really cool. We've got it from 24 different experts. You'll see all the positions divvied up into tiers. We've got average draft position across all the biggest fantasy websites, and you can even use draft mode so that you can check off the players when it comes time to make your picks on draft day. It works from your tablets, from your smartphone, from the computer, anywhere. You're not printing out stuff. You're not the guy taking magazines into your draft. You're a little bit stepped up into the future here. All right, go check it out on footballguys.com, and you can see all the rankings that we're talking about here.
Football Guys wouldn't exist without the magazine business.
That's
Just saying,
true.
Alfredo. But
That's
that was
true.
1998. So
Credit. This is a show that really just loves vintage things like Marion Motley and draft magazines. I love the start. This is a great start for us. All right, let's get to the next player here. It is Chris Olave, wide receiver for the New Orleans Saints, and I've got him as my wide receiver 11. I know that I am a little high on him. Dave, you're a little low. A little too darn low. Wide receiver 17. Football Guys consensus has him at wide receiver 13, so I'm closer to consensus. And average draft position has him at wide receiver 14. So I'm going to say this. I'll give you my pitch on Chris Olave pretty quickly here, because I think it's a cut and dry case. We are still not sure. Very similar to how Rashaad Penny has been medically, we are still not sure if Michael Thomas will be ready to go for training camp, if he'll be able to play in even a handful of games this year. He's played 10 games in 3 years. He's about to be 30 years old. That's younger than us, but that is like 85 in the NFL. Okay. And we've also seen that, and this is like something that does really correlate. If you're not participating in training camp, you do tend to be more susceptible to injury, right? You're not getting the same kind of conditioning. Your body's not getting used to those movements. It's a very real thing. I know we've got the potential Alvin Kamara suspension. We mentioned that before. But there's a lot of positives here with this offense. Like I mentioned, with the suspension, that's going to open up targets, right? Jarvis Landry, who was on the team last year, is gone. The Saints only went and they added a 6th-round pick, A.T. Perry, who I don't hate, but I don't think he's going to be commanding any targets. Now they got Derek Carr at quarterback, who I know is kind of like regular schmegular. Like he's whatever. He's middle of the field.
Regular schmegular.
My wife says regular schmegular all the time, and I told her I was going to steal that and use that for the podcast. So I'm very happy I was able to work that in. But he's still an improvement over Andy Dalton. And we saw that what Derek Carr has been able to do is support a not always elite receiver, but a wide receiver 1. Okay, we had Devontae Adams last year as the wide receiver 3, granted as Devontae Adams, but Hunter Renfrow, wide receiver 11 in 2021. And before that, we were talking about Darren Waller being one of the very best tight ends in the league, right up there with Travis Kelce. So Derek Carr I could say he could support like one guy. Let's not say like 2 or 3 receivers.
I don't mean to cut you off, but Michael Crabtree had his time with Oakland.
Oh, good pull. Dave, I feel like you just only know things that have not happened within the last 6 or 7 years. I feel like that's where all your knowledge derives from like 8 years ago. But let's take a look at this. Okay, I want to put this into perspective of how good Chris Olave was, because it's not just all about the surroundings. His rookie year was a lot better than we think. He was 15th in the NFL in target share, 3rd in air yards share, and Carr outperformed Andy Dalton with almost twice as many completions of 20-plus yard passes. So we are looking at a wide receiver and quarterback that could marry perfectly in this offense, looking at some deep balls. First 7 weeks of his career last year, Chris Olave, he was the wide receiver 13. Like he just showed up and he was playing really, really well, commanding a target share. I know that was without Michael Thomas. But then you compare him to Garrett Wilson, who everyone loves. Garrett Wilson, he had better than Garrett Wilson, right? He had more yards per game, a better catch rate, and higher yards per route run. And this one, Dave, is important. Okay. Since 2011, only 5 rookie wide receivers have gone over 2.4 yards per route run. I'm going to listen to you. Okay. First one, Odell Beckham Jr. Ever heard of him? AJ Brown, Justin Jefferson, Jamar Chase. Those are 4 really good wide receivers. Okay. They were all top 6 fantasy wide receivers in their second season in the NFL. Do you want to guess who the 5th one was?
Is it Chris Olave?
You're so dang smart. Chris Olave. And I bring all this up because the yards per route run stuff matters, okay? It means that this wide receiver is being asked to consistently do nuanced things down the field, right? They're not just taking little slants. They're not getting screens. They're not catching passes behind the line. They are actually being asked on a consistent basis. They're not the guy that's like, all right, just run a go route. They're doing this on a consistent basis where they are being targeted deeper down the field and running routes that require a bit more savvy, a bit more of being a technician, which Chris Olave is. I'm all in on Chris Olave this year. Dave, and everyone listening and watching, you should be too.
So, first of all, I want to say Chris Olave is a very, very good player.
No, you hate him.
I'm not trying to diminish the talent.
You hate him.
I don't hate him. I just don't know if he's in the best situation. I mean, despite all those numbers that you talk about last year, he was still the wide receiver 26. And, there were a lot of weeks that he really wasn't showing up for you in fantasy. And I don't know, maybe this is the spiciest take of the show, even spicier than ranking
Oh
Rashaad Penny
no.
where I did. But I don't know if Derek Carr is a huge upgrade from what we saw from Andy Dalton last year. Andy Dalton wasn't terrible. I don't think we talked about this a little bit with Alvin Kamara, but I don't know if Derek Carr is going to completely revamp this offense here. So you're looking at some decent target competition. Obviously, a big if on Michael Thomas, but if he's back, you've got him and he's going to gobble up, 30, 31% of the targets there. You got Juwan Johnson and Taysom Hill with their tight end shenanigans. They're not going anywhere. You got Rashid Shaheed, who came on pretty late last year as a surprising talent, an undrafted talent who showed up down the stretch. And then we talked about Alvin Kamara possibly coming back into the passing game. So overall, I'm just not a fan of what Dennis Allen did last year. It was a slow pace of play, sixth fewest pass attempts in the league. And I just think that where he's getting drafted right now is close to his ceiling. My kind of macro industry take on Chris Olave right now is that everybody faded him last year because he was the late declare. And everybody was wrong on Chris Olave because of that. And now I think that they've overcorrected a little bit. And they want to say, hey, sure, I was wrong last year, but this year, now I've got him as a top 10 guy. I'm definitely not going to be wrong this year. And I get it because I did the same thing with Amon St. Brown this year. I've got him as my wide receiver 7 because I was so wrong on him last year. So I think that Chris Olave is a very good player, but I think that putting him inside the top 12 is just getting a little ahead of your skis there.
First of all, good use of the word shenanigans. I was impressed with that one. It's always a good show when you can work in the word shenanigans. But the other thing, like, so you mentioned the sixth fewest pass attempts. Would you be passing the ball a lot if Andy Dalton was your quarterback?
Andy Dalton wasn't that bad last year, and
Oh,
I think that's like
stop.
a big misconception. He really wasn't. I mean,
He wasn't bad, but he wasn't good.
is
Like, I
Derek
think
Carr
that
good?
I think that Derek Carr can be good, at least for fantasy. Like, is it are they that's also a bad division too, right? You look at the Bucks, you look at the Falcons, you look at the Panthers. There's not a lot of good defense being played there. Maybe the Bucks probably still have one of the better defenses, but there's a good chance here where the Saints are not only good, but they win their division and Derek Carr all of a sudden starts playing a little bit better. I'm not going to say he's going to be great, but I think he's at least an upgrade over Andy Dalton.
Buy into it a little bit. And, maybe I am a little bit too low on Chris Olave, but just looking at some of the other guys that are getting drafted there, it's really tough for me to move him up. I think that where he's going right now, getting drafted as kind of a back end wide receiver 1, we're drafting him darn close to his ceiling. I don't know how much room he really has to grow there. So for me, looking at some of these other guys, Amari Cooper has just been as steady as can be. I don't really want to put him ahead of
Okay.
Amari Cooper because I would expect Deshaun Watson to be more likely to lead a high-powered offense than I would Derek Carr. DK Metcalf, I guess that's probably the one guy that maybe I would probably, looking at my rankings right now, some of the guys I have ahead of Chris Olave are Amari Cooper, DK Metcalf, DeAndre Hopkins, T. Higgins, Devonta Smith. I think the one guy that I could probably move him ahead of is DK Metcalf. I'm just a sucker for DK Metcalf. I keep betting on this guy every single year, and maybe I should take a deeper look at that one, but I don't know. It's tough for me to move him higher than wide receiver 16.
Yeah, I think there's a lot that could change with DeAndre Hopkins depending on where he goes. I'm surprised you have T.
Well,
Higgins that high.
if he goes to Tennessee, I'm knocking him down. Tennessee
Yeah,
is probably the worst possible landing spot. But if he lands, still talking about possible Chiefs or Bills, or maybe he possibly lands with the Patriots, which doesn't sound great, but he's probably seen 150 targets there. So Hopkins, if he lands with Tennessee, I'll move him down. But T. Higgins and Devonta Smith, they're their perceived wide receiver too, and I think that's why they get knocked. But two very good players on two very good offenses. I'd take both of them ahead of Olave.
So what we've learned here is I'm right, Dave's wrong. We're going to move on to the next wide receiver here. Dave, you picked a guy who I think there could be a lot of opportunity for him this season, but a lot's going to depend on the quarterback.
Yeah, and first of all, anybody who has watched the Launchpad previously or watched the Pretend GM, I was actually touting this guy back in March on an episode of the Pretend GM, and I was on the FF Fellas show a few days ago talking about him. I talk about this guy every single chance I get, and I am talking about Marquise Brown. This dude was a ticking time bomb the entire time he was in Baltimore.
Wait a sec. Wait a sec. For those of you that are listening, Dave is wearing a shirt. Dave went online and bought a Marquise Brown shirt. I feel like you are one of the 10 people, and the other 9 are all in Marquise Brown's family that own the Marquise Brown shirt.
Big fan of the talent. And
Big
when
fan.
he was in Baltimore, I mean, we saw, like, if you look at the route run data and the target share, we knew that he was a very good receiver, but the issue is that he was just held back on a terrible, terrible offense led by Greg Roman. And then last year, he gets traded to this air raid system in Arizona with Cliff Kingsbury and Kyler Murray. And what happened? This ticking time bomb I talk about exploded. 10.7 targets per game over the 6 game stretch where he was healthy with no DeAndre Hopkins. He was the wide receiver 5 in fantasy football scoring. Stephon Diggs, Cooper Kupp, Justin Jefferson, Tyreek Hill, and then Marquise Brown. He was on pace for 1,400 yards and 8 touchdowns last year. And now DeAndre Hopkins is out of the picture. So the stage is set for him to be that bona fide, no questions asked wide receiver 1. Now, the discount right now you're getting is because of Kyler Murray. And we don't know when he's coming back. We don't know if he's coming back, but we got some recent reports that he is eyeing week 1. And if we look at the 8-month timetable, which is pretty standard for a quarterback to come back, he should be back sometime between week 3 and week 5. But worst case scenario, he's probably back before their bye in week 14. I don't really see many situations where Kyler Murray doesn't play this year. Either they are completely out of contention and they want Kyler Murray to come back to show that his knee is healthy and they can boost his trade value a little bit, or somehow they've stumbled into a couple early season wins and he wants to rush back because they're actually contending. Either way, Marquise Brown is a very, very good player. And even if he has a rough start to the season with Clayton Tune or Colt McCoy or
Oof.
Trace McSorley, or I don't even know who the quarterback's going to be for Arizona if Kyler Murray can't play. But even with that rough start, Kyler Murray will be back down the stretch. And then you have Kyler Murray and Marquise Brown with their explosive connection to be that playoff hammer through the end of the fantasy football playoff. So I'm drafting Marquise Brown everywhere I can.
Yeah, I'm not against it because I know that Marquise Brown has the talent. I know last year we saw the target share. I'd probably have him in my top 24 if I knew, or maybe even top 20 if I knew that Kyler was the healthy starter all season. But we could be in store for 6 to 10 weeks of Colt McCoy. We could be in store for I don't know how many weeks of Clayton Tune. This could be really, really bad. You know, Colt McCoy and Marquise Brown were together last year for 2 games, and it was 6.5 fantasy points in those games. It was not pretty. So that's the only thing that worries me. It's not a talent thing. It's not like a targets thing. It's just how bad could the quarterback play be and how much of this is going to be, you know, dump offs to Rondale Moore and easy passes to Trey McBride and more dump offs to James Conner. I feel like that's what this offense is going to become. So that does worry me a little bit. Let's take a look at my rankings here. I've got Marquise Brown at the wide receiver 30. Ahead of him, I've got Deontay Johnson at 29, Brandon Ayuk at 28, Tyler Lockett at 27, and Calvin Ridley at 26. And man, I don't know. I don't know that I can move him ahead of any of those guys because I think that Ridley, Lockett, and Ayuk all possess the same type of upside as Marquise Brown. I think that when we're looking at target hog kind of guys, Deontay and Marquise are about the same. I think Marquise has a better upside than Deontay Johnson does, especially with Kyler. But I think I'm going to do what you said earlier, which is I'm going to wait. I
Mhm.
need to see what the drumbeat is from camp. I need to see what the health is like for Kyler Murray. So for now, I'm going to keep Marquise Brown at wide receiver 30, which, if I'm not mistaken, let me just check this. Yeah, that's still ahead of ADP. So we neither of us dislike Marquise Brown. I'm just not willing to go as high as you are and put him at wide receiver 21.
Fair enough. And then the one thing I'll add, a little bit of context. You talk about how bad his games were with Colt McCoy last year, but that also had DeAndre Hopkins in the picture. And DeAndre Hopkins is a perfect match for Colt McCoy, just running those little 8-yard dig routes and just getting 5 yards of separation and making a really easy target for Colt McCoy. So I am certainly concerned about what a Kyler Murray less offense will look like. But for me, drafting Marquise Brown is drafting him to be that late season hammer where you can draft a guy as your wide receiver 3 or wide receiver 4 that is going to have wide receiver 1 upside down the stretch.
Let's continue on here. I'm going to be talking about another wide receiver who, going into his second season, there's a lot of projecting here. And it's once again, it'll deal a lot with the quarterback and the offense. And it's Drake London, wide receiver for the Atlanta Falcons. I know, admittedly, I'm a little high on Drake London. I've got him as my wide receiver 19. Dave, you're a little low, in my opinion. You've got him at wide receiver 29. Football Guys, I think, is a little low on him for having him at wide receiver 28. So I'm going to talk to the other 22 analysts and tell them to raise this. This is ADP is at wide receiver 26. Okay, so I've got to convince the world here. I've got a lot on my shoulders. So all right, so doing the projecting. I love kind of you mentioned like all these historical comps, right? And I kind of did the same thing for Chris Olave. There's a stat here that I got from JJ Zacharyson, who has been on a couple of our shows, good friend of the show, JJ Zacharyson, and he pointed out amongst all rookie wide receivers since 2011, Drake London is third in targets per route run, meaning he's getting targeted frequently while he's on the field. Second in target share per game, meaning he owns a lot of the passing volume in that offense, despite it not being too much. And fifth in yards per team pass attempt, which is sort of I don't want to say a new metric, but it's been a metric that's been popping up a bit more often as a better indicator of success for these wide receivers. Only four other rookies have been top five in those categories. And it's a lot of the same names that I listed before: Justin Jefferson, Jamar Chase, AJ Brown, Odell Beckham Jr. So we keep talking about these guys, whether it's Olave or London, that had good rookie years, and their metrics, right? Like all the spreadsheet data nerd stuff indicates they're pretty good at football. Now we just have to see what happens with the offense around them. Is the quarterback actually going to be good enough? And I think that everything in Atlanta should be good enough for London to at least be a wide receiver too, and the talent could carry him even higher. With his rookie season in a low volume passing offense, Dave, we all already know this, right? But he was still 22nd in targets in the league, fifth in target share, which is the highest amongst all rookie wide receivers since 2014. He was second in target rate, meaning how often he was targeted when running a route. And that Falcons offense, I think that what we're going to see this season is probably a bit more 12 personnel. They went and signed Jonnu Smith. That means they're going to 12 personnel means two tight ends, right? So they're going to put two tight ends out there. It's going to be Drake London and Mac Hollins as the other two wide receivers. So there still should be plenty of volume. And the per game pass attempts, this was the big thing. Okay. The per game pass attempts went up when Desmond Ridder became the quarterback, an extra 5 attempts per game. That's nearly an extra 100 pass attempts on the season. I'm sure some volume can be found in there. Mariota was attempting passes the third lowest rate of any quarterback since 1985. See, I can pull historical data too, David. I think there's got to be some positive regression here. Like there's got to be something. Drake London got better when Desmond Ridder was the quarterback. He was getting nearly 3 more targets per game. The catchable target rate went up. And that's something that's been talked about a lot, especially with like Kyle Pitts, was that Marcus Mariota was so off target. Catchable target rate went up by 9%. And there was an extra 1.3 yards per route run. He was getting more comfortable. Things were just looking better for that offense. And in the final 4 games, Drake London was actually the wide receiver 18 on a points per game basis. I know that's a small sample size, but even if everything just goes bad and Taylor Heineke has to start, he had Terry McLaurin as the wide receiver 10 across his starts. So I'm not overly worried about Drake London, but I do concede I might be a little overly optimistic.
So you talk about that 4-game sample size at the end of the year, and Desmond Ridder started, but Kyle Pitts also wasn't playing. And I think that's the big concern for me is that, we throw around too many mouths to feed. It's such a crutch argument or a cliche, whatever you want to call it in fantasy football analysis. But this was one of the slowest paced offenses last year with one of the lowest passing rates. And now they have Bijan Robinson. They still have Kyle Pitts and they still have Drake London. So I'll concede that I'm probably too low on him because last year when you look at target share, it is Devontae Adams, Cooper Kupp, Jamar Chase, Tyreek Hill, and then Drake London. I mean, that is great company to be in. I just don't know how much there is to go around here. You already talked about it, the low volume, 24 pass attempts per game. Personally, I just think that Kyle Pitts is a better receiver. And the nice thing about Kyle Pitts is you can draft him later and you can put him in your tight end spot. So for me, my fade on Drake London is more of a tout on Kyle Pitts than anything else. It feels a lot like Olave, where we're drafting him near his ceiling because we don't know what this offense is going to look like. The last thing I'll talk about are the splits with and without Kyle Pitts. With Kyle Pitts on the field, Drake London had 5.8 targets and 37 yards per game. And then he exploded down the stretch without Kyle Pitts, 8.3 targets, 70 yards per game. Kyle Pitts is going to be back and healthy to start this season. I don't know. Maybe I'm dumb. It's stupid to bet against a player as talented as Drake London, but look at Kyle Pitts. Extremely talented player, and we've been betting on him year after year, and he just keeps leaving us wanting more. Arthur Smith is just a bad man for fantasy football, and I don't want him coaching any teams anymore.
So, it's interesting. Like you mentioned Kyle Pitts, and first of all, I'm dumbfounded that you said he's a better receiver than Drake London. I think he's a better athlete. Sure. Is he a unicorn at the tight end position? Sure. But Drake, I'm so far the opposite direction. That Drake London to me is the better receiver. But you mentioned like how this is it's the situation, right, where Kyle Pitts was out and Drake London succeeded. It feels so similar to me, like the Amon-Ra St. Brown thing after his rookie year, where he came on late, and a lot of people are like, oh, well, he was only good because DeAndre Swift was hurt and TJ Hawkinson was out. And, but good players, like it's been said by many, many analysts, good players earn targets, right? And it's about what they do with that. And he continued to produce with that. And I don't necessarily see that this offense can't have both of these guys in big featured roles while Bijan Robinson is looking good in the running game as well. I don't know. Like I do concede I'm probably a little high, but I still say that you're way too low. Let's take a look at your wide receiver rankings. You've got him at 29. 29. All right. You've got at 28, Mike Williams, 27, Chris Godwin, 26, Jerry Jeudy, 25, Deebo Samuel. All right. Are you willing to move Drake London up?
If I was going to move him up, I could make a case for moving him ahead of Mike Williams. Quentin Johnston is a guy that I really, really like, and I think that he's going to have a bigger role than a lot of people are projecting for him as a rookie. So I could move him ahead of Chris Godwin or ahead of Mike Williams. Chris Godwin is another one that's tough because very similar situation to Drake London, right? All the talent in the world, but what's the offense going to look like? What's the quarterback situation going to look like? So I could potentially move him up to wide receiver 26 from where I have him right now. But I got to say, I thought that I was actually putting a pretty big fade on Drake London with my ranking. I'm surprised actually how aligned I am with ADP and with Football Guys consensus. This time of year, I'm not looking at ADP or consensus. I'm kind of doing my rankings from a blank canvas. I thought that I was fading London hard, but I'm kind of surprised to see that the consensus got there as well.
Well, if there's one thing we know, it's that the general consensus is never wrong about anything, Dave. Let's get to our last player here, a wide receiver that you actually just mentioned.
Yeah, Quentin Johnston. And how about that? How about a professional
That's a
transition there? I knew
tease.
exactly what I was doing, Alfredo. I wanted to set myself up to talk about Quentin Johnston because I just love this guy. We already got just out of OTAs, like training camp didn't even open yet. And after OTAs, they came out and said that he had locked in his role as the wide receiver 3 ahead of Josh Palmer, which we expected it. But like, when do you ever get that story this early in the offseason? Like, we had Justin Jefferson losing reps to BC Johnson a month before kickoff his rookie season. And the Chargers are already coming out saying, yeah, Quentin Johnston is that guy. And if you hear like all the players when they get interviewed about, how are OTAs, everybody's just gushing about Quentin Johnston. And now they have Kellen Moore, which is going to completely revamp this offense. I mean, there's a lot of schematic changes this year happening with a lot of different teams, but I don't know if any are going to be as big as what Kellen Moore is going to do to this, especially coming from what they had last year with Joe Lombardi, just a terrible offense to a very creative mind who's going to draw up explosive plays. And then looking at the opportunity here, Quentin Johnston is going to be playing from the jump. I mean, Kellen Moore runs a ton of 3 wide receiver sets. If he has already solidified that role as the wide receiver 3, he's essentially going to be a full-time player starting in week 1. And then you look at the injury concerns for the veteran wide receivers there. Mike Williams, he has only had 1 full health season in his career, and that was his second year in the league, 2018, when he only started 5 games. Keenan Allen hasn't had a full health season since 2019. So we've seen a lot of opportunities where these guys have been down, Keenan Allen and Mike Williams. And in those situations, we've seen guys like Joshua Palmer and DeAndre Carter step in and be very productive. And Quentin Johnston's a better talent than all of them. In the 8 games that Josh Palmer has played without Mike Williams or Keenan Allen, he averaged 7.8 targets and 12 PPR points per game. Now, the Chargers already showed their hand. They came out and they told us that he is a better player than Joshua Palmer. So if he's going to be getting a similar role and he's a better player, we can project a minimum 12 points per game if he gets that opportunity. So for me, he is just a wildly athletic guy. The opportunity is going to be his for the taking. He's got the prototypical size you want to see in a receiver. He's got a leap burst. He's a yards after the catch and tackle breaking machine. First round pick on a high powered offense. He's tied to an elite young quarterback. This is everything I want to see from a wide receiver that I expect to break out as a rookie.
So for me, when I was looking at Quentin Johnston and scouting him coming out of college, he was a guy that when I saw him, I said, well, I don't know why everyone has him as a wide receiver 1 or wide receiver 2, because this is a player that's going to need time and patience to develop. Very much how I saw Treylon Burks last year, and that still seemed to be the case, right? Quentin Johnston's not a nuanced route runner. He's coming from a system where he was the only guy that really had to do anything in that offense. And then Kendry Miller was just running all over the place. And a lot is made about the yards after catch ability, the run after catch ability for Quentin Johnston. That was something that was part of that TCU system. all three TCU draft eligible wide receivers were near the top in the nation in yards after catch. I believe all three of them were like top 10. So it's something about that system that sets these guys up very similar like Miami, the Miami Dolphins, where these guys can get an easy run after catch. What I see when I look at Quentin Johnston, because we are projecting, right? Like it's scouting, is he's a strider. He's a strider. He doesn't really attack the ball, kind of the way that Mike Williams does. For me, he reminds me a bit more of like a Terrace Marshall, a guy who is big, is fast, but he doesn't really use all those gifts in the most effective way. And I get it. We all love Kellen Moore in the offense, but you mentioned, Dave, that he's going to be the wide receiver 3 in this offense. How did the wide receiver 3 do in Kellen Moore's offense last year? How did the wide receiver 2 do in Kellen Moore's offense last year? I want to be excited because it sounds great. Big, tall receiver, fast on a really cool offense, good quarterback, good offensive coordinator. But this to me, probably not, it's not a apples to apples comparison, but like we saw a similar thing last year with Jalen Tolbert, big rookie wide receiver who should be getting a guaranteed starting role, who had a similar skill set. It's not always easy for these wide receivers to transition into these pass heavy offenses because they have so many concepts that they have to pick up. So I would not be surprised if him being at the top of the depth chart is him just continuously getting reps, and it's a confidence thing, right? And it's showing we have confidence in you because, man, I don't know. I can't really get in on Quentin Johnston here, especially we all like Austin Eckler. We all like Keenan Allen. Gerald Everett is like everyone's favorite sleeper tight end. Mike Williams and Josh Palmer, they're going to play, like they're not gone. So there's still a lot of weapons there. And man, I don't know. I think Quentin Johnston gets a few of those big games. I just don't think that we'll ever know when they're coming. Anything from you?
So I don't know if it was a rhetorical question, but you asked how the wide receiver 3 fared last year. The wide receiver 3 last year in Kellen Moore's offense was Noah Brown, a 7th round, pretty untalented player, and he still saw 74 targets last year. So if you think that Quentin Johnston is a better player than Noah Brown, and you think that Justin Herbert is a better quarterback than Dak Prescott, we could probably up from that 74 a little bit. So if Quentin Johnston is seeing 100 targets as a rookie, do you think that he can be a wide receiver 2 or a wide receiver 3?
No. I don't
All
because
right,
I also
fair
think
enough.
too, Austin Eckler is going to be getting so many of those catches as well. I think there's just a bit more talent on that Chargers offense than there was in the Cowboys offense. And I think Quentin Johnston is not the guy that's going to overcome the talent early. It's going to be like what you said, right? Like Mike Williams gets hurt and deep into the season, Quentin Johnston is going to have like 2 or 3 good games. And we're all talking about him next year as being like, this is the guy who's going to break out now that he knows what he's doing. Let's take a look at my wide receiver rankings here. I'm admittedly low. I've got Quentin Johnston at wide receiver 56, which let me just check with the ADP. Yeah, I'm well below ADP, but I'm not that far off from the Football Guys consensus at wide receiver 53. So I've got Quentin Johnston at 56, DJ Chark at 55, Tyler Boyd, who I was looking this up. Tyler Boyd at 54. He's been a wide receiver 38 or better in 5 straight seasons. Like, why do we still hate him? But that's neither here nor there. Michael Thomas at 53 and Sky Moore at 52. I think here what I'm willing to do is I'm actually going to move Tyler Boyd up. I'm going to do a whole shuffle. I'm going to do Tyler Boyd to 52, Sky Moore to 53, Quentin Johnston to 54, Michael Thomas to 55, and then DJ Chark can take a backseat to 56. How does that sound?
Am I hearing this correctly? Did you just bump Quentin
No.
Johnston down
I moved him up.
All right.
Well, if you want to get
fair
more
enough.
of this fantasy football goodness, we are giving you more bonus content over in the audio version of this podcast. Just click the link in the description to subscribe on Apple or Spotify. Or if you're a video only person, I highly recommend sticking around and watch one of the next videos that we have here to the right of your screen. Thank you guys so much for joining us. We'll see you next time.